All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this committee the whole meeting of the Arlington Heights Village Board to order on Monday, October 22nd, 2018, and ask if you would please rise and join the Village Board in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, for purposes of roll, let me just introduce the board members who are with us tonight. To your right, Trustee Jim Tinaglia, Trustee John Scaletta, Trustee Robin LaBedz, Trustee Rich Baldino, Trustee Mike Sidor, and joining us is Trustee Carol Blackwood. I'm Village President Tom Hayes. Also with us are Village Manager Randy Recklaus, our Assistant Village Manager Diana McCula, our Director of Planning and Community Development, Charles Perkins, and our Assistant Director of the same department, Bill Enright. And also taking copious notes is Kim over there. We thank you for helping us out tonight, Kim. We have a very important agenda item tonight. That's the downtown parking study, and we thank in advance Rich and Associates for their very detailed and colorful report. A lot of information in here, which I know is going to be very useful to the Village of Arlington Heights going forward, and so we can't thank them enough. In advance of their presentation, I know they're going to further enlighten us on all the very interesting things that this report determined and found out, and is going to help us down the road. So again, thank you for your efforts in advance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Recklaus.
Thank you. As you mentioned, tonight we're going to be getting a presentation from Rich and Associates on the downtown parking study conducted over the past several months. This project was called for and authorized by the Village Board last year as part of the strategic priorities process. As you all know, downtown parking systems are very, very complex. The needs and behavior of commuters, downtown residents, downtown retail, entertainment, and service customers, and downtown employees all must be balanced. Oftentimes, the ongoing conflicts between these user groups can cause necessary rules that may seem counterintuitive to users of the systems. The system also has to take into account the capacity of the village to enforce any rules put into effect. If a rule can't be feasibly enforced, it will often be ignored by users, and that's why managing downtown parking has no easy answers. For those reasons, the board directed staff to engage in a very inclusive process for this project. We heavily promoted a survey that was conducted of the different user types. I'm happy to report that the survey conducted as part of this study included responses from over 1,400 individuals with different perspectives. Out of recognition of the interest in this project, we are televising tonight's meeting and streaming it live, even though we don't normally televise committee of the whole meetings. We put a copy of this study on the website last week. But aside from the qualitative data that we've received from all the stakeholders, Rich and Associates also collected and analyzed a lot, and if you read the study, you know I mean a lot, of hard data about our system and how we are all using it. As users of the system, we all have opinions about improvements, but for a parking system as large and as complex as ours, it's important to weigh the data collected along with the personal perspective and anecdotes before making any changes in policy. Tonight, we're going to be given an overview of the results. We're not looking for any final decisions on policy changes this evening, but we would like to get some general direction from the board on some of the simpler recommendations and gain an understanding of the board's feelings about the findings of the study. But at this point, I'd like to hand things over to David Burr from Rich and Associates to present their findings.
Thank you, members of the board. Good evening. As we mentioned, we have an overview of the study that was completed. As was mentioned, this has been undertaken over the last several months. We began some of our data collection way back in April when we came into town, and we did some initial assessment of the existing parking facilities. And then we did starting some very detailed counts of the parking, and I'll get into that in a moment, starting back in May.
want to point it at this direction a little bit. Oh.
There we go.
Well, I just did that, so.
Did it do something?
We can advance the slides for you too.
Next slide, please. What I want to talk to you about is the approach. As was mentioned, it was a very detailed approach and a number of different elements in this. Talk about some of the key survey results. And then our analysis actually looked at both south side and north side parts of the downtown, north and south of the metro tracks, independently, looking at the supply and the demand on each of those, on those two sides of the downtown, and then looking at some of the recommendations. Next slide, please. As we mentioned, we split the block. Each block was given a number, split in at the metro rail tracks. The area is shown on the slide there. Is the capacity, and I'll get that in a moment, was about evenly split. Next slide. There we go. As I mentioned, we evaluated the supply independently, and looking at the unique conditions on each. On the south side, we have some major demand generators. We have the Metropolis Theater and Ballroom, a lot of demand that created. We have the movie theater, that is bringing folks into town. We have various shops, a lot of restaurants, and 3 parking garages providing some of the supply. On the north side, our supply elements consist of a library. We saw a lot of use around that. The commuters, the facilities over on the north side brings a lot of the demand over on that side. There were shops and restaurants, but a smaller number compared to the south side, but we had to take that into consideration. And we have just the 1 parking garage on the north side providing parking supply. As was mentioned, some of the key elements were the customer responses. Over 1,000 individuals responded to these surveys. We marketed these. Some of the businesses put posters in the windows. This was an online survey. And one of the key results of this is the proportion of folks that are using village parking resources, either village parking lots, the on-street spaces, or the village garages. That worked out to about 90% of the demand was using village facilities. Another key question that we asked is how many visits do you generally per trip, and the average was just under 2. That is a key point because when we classify parking, we classify public parking as parking. I can park there and I can go anywhere I want. If it's private, if you're going to that business, generally what they expect is you park your car where you're visiting your business. If you're going to go someplace else, get in your car and go to the next destination. Leave that space available for my next customer. So the fact that folks are visiting more than 1 trip is the public supply facilitates that. I can park and I can do the errands that I came into town. Another key question that came out of this was the length of stay that folks were staying in town from the surveys. If we look at all responses, the average stay was about 3 hours and 22 minutes. But that includes folks that are staying 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. To us, most of those visits are really, they're inconsistent for what you would, if you're coming into the downtown. So if we discount stays longer than 5 hours, we're getting an average stay of about 2 hours and 47 minutes. And again, that was one of the things that we looked at, that both that total average stay and that modified average stay when we were looking at some of the recommendations. The residents, downtown residents, we surveyed those folks. We had 325 folks respond to those. A good portion of those folks were owner-occupied or rental apartment buildings, but we did have a few folks in some of the smaller units above some of the businesses. They may have an apartments above theirs. We asked the question, do they have a designated parking space? About 25% said yes, they have a spot, it's dedicated for them. Other responses, you know, there's parking available, but I don't have a designated spot. A lot of 50%, or more than 50%, were using a residential parking permit in one of the village garages. That's generally the Vale garage or the North garage. We asked the question, parking for guests. That was one of the things that came out in our focus group meetings, you know, guest parking. And, you know, little kind of response, surprising response there, because almost half says usually there's parking available, but not always. There was about a third said, you know, not at all, but nearly half said, you know, not generally, but not always. And the other interesting question that came is where do they park? 62% said they're parking on street. Now, the interesting thing about that is on-street parking is limited to 2 hours. So that's telling us that those folks, the 2-hour parking is, and I'll touch about that in a moment, the 2-hour parking is sufficient for many of their visits. We asked downtown employees, and we had 47 responses for that. 94% said they drive and park their own car when they're coming into town to work. The interesting thing there, of those that drive, 100% are using village parking facilities, either a village garage, a village lot, or on-street spaces. And the graphs that are at the bottom there, the interesting thing about that is when folks were showing up, the proportion of people, their start time. And we see a lot of start times between 8 and 9 o'clock, and then a big exodus around 4 or 5 o'clock, except for the later arriving, perhaps, restaurant staff. And again, that was something that led into one of the recommendations, and I'll talk about that in a moment. South side, looking at that individually. We have a total of 2,800 spaces, parking spaces on the south side. 62% of those are what we defined as publicly available. And again, that is a good benchmark. Basic rule of thumb or benchmark is that a community control a minimum of 50% of the parking is publicly available. Again, to facilitate those folks being able to park once and visit multiple destinations. You control 62% of that on the south side, and so you're actually meeting that benchmark. Just about 1,500 of those spaces are in off-street lots, and the balance of 282 spaces are on-street. And again, most of your on-street parking is time limited to 2 hours. It's free parking, but it's 2-hour parking. And what we also show is you've got in the off-street locations on the south side, it's basically 3 facilities. It's the Vale Garage at 1,097 spaces. You've got the Evergreen Underground Garage at about 300 spaces, and then you've got Lot E on Block 10 there that is both commuter parking and 3-hour shopper parking. That's the extent of your off-street parking on the south side. The rest of that is supported by the on-street spaces. Now, again, one of the key things that the key data collection was 9 survey dates where we actually had a team of myself and my colleague and some other folks, and we, on 9 survey dates, starting in early May, we did 3 dates, Thursday, Friday, Saturday in early May, the same 3 days of the week in mid to late June, and then the same 3 days in mid-July. And we started these counts at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we went until 2 o'clock in the morning. And that really gave us a good insight as to how the parking was operated. We saw, you know, when the commuters coming in, what's happening with residents, where they're parking, what's happening with the shopper and visitor parking. We got some very interesting patterns, and again, I'll touch on that in a moment. And virtually all on-street parking, if we could access it, we counted it. The spaces that we were not able to count is there are controlled spaces beneath several buildings that are dedicated only to residents, and so we weren't able to access those spaces. But virtually everything else above ground, if we could access it, we did count it. What we found is, again, this is looking on the south side. Our peak day occurred on a Friday during our June counts, where between 7 and 8 o'clock, we saw a maximum of 1,731 spaces. Again, that's of the spaces that we were able to observe. That seemed to be consistent for the peak time, 7, 8 o'clock for most days, although there was a few days in July where it actually got a little bit later in the evening. One of the interesting that we found here is when we looked at the public parking supply, and this again, the graph on the left is looking at Fridays because that was our peak day. What we found is about 80% of the publicly available supply is occupied at that peak time. And again, that's at that 7 to 8 o'clock time period. The other interesting thing that we found was the on-street parking. It was reaching 100%. virtually every on-street space on the south side of downtown within our study area was occupied. And what we actually did find is it went a little bit above that because there were areas outside the study area along Campbell, west of Chestnut Street where folks were parking. And what we also found is on some of these other blocks, you have the spaces marked out and cars would park at the ends in unmarked spaces during the peak evenings. So they're kind of creating their own spaces. You still had space available, but they were looking for those on-street spaces, and so they would kind of create their own. We also looked at the Vale Avenue garage, and what this graph shows is the number of spaces available at various times of the day, and this is looking at our June counts, our Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays in June. And what we're getting down to is a minimum or a maximum of 156 spaces during that peak 8 to 9 hour on this particular day. What that means is there's spaces available in the garage, but individuals are probably going to have to drive up to at least the 4th floor in order to find one. First floor is 4-hour shopper parking. Those spaces are getting full. The 2nd and 3rd floor right now is designated as permanent parking, so a transient or someone coming down for a restaurant, they can't park in those spaces. So they're going to have to go up to at least the 4th floor in order to find a spot. And what we found between the 4th and 5th floor and a few on the 1st floor, we get down to 156 spaces. So that's, you have the capacity, it's just, it's not clearly evident unless someone is willing to drive up there and then search the parking floor. What this graph shows is this is the peak hour occupancy on Friday, June 22nd. And we did this for each of the 9 survey dates. What is that peak occupancy during both the daytime hours and the evening? And again, on the south side, our peak was coincident during the evening hours. And the areas in red are block areas or block faces or parking lots where it is 85 or higher % occupied. Areas in yellow are from 75 to 85%, areas in green 25 to 50%, and then areas in blue below that. And one of the things I want to point out with this slide is a lot of those, that blue, those are private areas. So during the evening, they're not being used, but they're much lower utilization. So we did this looking at each of the days, and this really gives us a good idea of the pattern of where folks are parking. Now, the occupancy stuff, that gives us a lot of information. But one of the other things we want to do is we want to be able to model and be able to calibrate is where is this demand occurring. And so we got from the village the land use information. We broke this out into square footage. But we also added into that the Metropolis Theater, their seating, the movie theater, their seating, the attendance at Metropolis ballroom event. We got some information from that in order to project what that impact is on the parking demand. They're creating parking demand as well. And when we take all this information, we have the columns in orange represent the observed occupancy that we saw, and the column, or the line in blue represents what our parking demand model shows us. And when we compare what the model is showing us to what we're actually seeing, you see we get a very good correlation. That lends confidence in the values that we're using in order to project what those parking needs are going to be. Because we take that parking demand and we look at that parking demand on a block-by-block basis. This is the example of that model, and again, this is looking at the evening peak hour. We're coming up with here 2,409 space demand, and that is a little bit higher than the previous slide because you see the blocks in yellow. Those were residential spaces that were not available to us as part of that initial count. So we had to add those back in, that demand and that supply, so that is in there. So we're showing 2,409 spaces. The columns on the right show if we look at total demand versus total supply, we have a gross surplus of 412 spaces. Now again, that includes spaces that are privately controlled that they'll have signs and say, hey, if you park here, you're going to get towed. So we look at a net basis where we take that excess private supply and we throw that out of the calculation, say those spaces are not available. When we do that, we're down to about a 200 space surplus. And again, it's how do we manage that parking? You know, and that's again looking at, and I'll talk about that in a moment. This is taking that previous chart and putting the demand on a block by block basis. Again, this looks at each block as an island. It is the demand on that block versus the supply on that block. So it is not uncommon you have blocks in a deficit condition, which are the blocks scheduled shown in red or yellow there. Block 13 is a deficit of about 160. Block 18 about 485. That is using capacity in the Vale garage or in one of your other on-street or off-street parking areas. And the blocks shown in green or blue are blocks that have a surplus, the demand on that block versus the supply on that block. Now, we also looked at future demand, and the demand that is going to be driving in the future is Hainani. That was not open at the time we were doing our counts, but information that we have from that is about 180 seats. That would create additional demand during the evening. We also looked at, for the Metropolis Ballroom, a larger event. On the dates that we did our survey, or that we did that peak survey, we got information from the Metropolis, and they had about a 100-guest wedding. For the future, we are projecting that could be as many as a 250-guest wedding. Our understanding is they actually want to expand. We originally looked at, you know, perhaps a 200, and then we understand that it could be larger, so we projected a 250 space. The big driver of the potential demand is that vacant parcel just west of the Vale Avenue garage. That would accommodate 438 residents. Our understanding is all that demand would be accommodated on site. It would also have 18,000 square feet of commercial space that right now is allocated as 6,000 square feet of retail, 6,000 of office, and 6,000 of restaurant. We have projected a worst case as if that was using village facilities, but we understand that with this information, it would probably be required that the developer would have to provide for that on site as opposed to on your facilities. But it's shown as a worst case as if that was not the case. And with that, we're showing a net deficit of the downtown of about 56 spaces in the future, again, if that demand is included with yours. The north side, again, different unique conditions. 64% of the parking on the north side is publicly available. Again, very close to what we found on the south side, but a little different makeup of what we're finding over there. Even though 64%, a lot of that is designated or is used as commuter parking. A number of areas along the track. There's a large lot just west of the library that's about 175 spaces. That is designated generally as commuter parking. And then we have the north garage with its 800 spaces. The peak day that we found on the north side coincided with our first day, and that was about 1 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, about 1,400 spaces. Again, it's an entirely different dynamic over there because of the large impact of what we're seeing for commuters. We get a peak earlier in the day, and then it tends to drop off. They don't have the magnitude of the shops and restaurants that we have over on the south side. They don't have the Metropolis Theater. They don't have a movie theater that is bringing that, helping to contribute to that nighttime demand. So their demand is relatively early in the day. And then this graph just kind of shows that, the 1,400 spaces. This is looking at Thursdays in May, June, and July. And then looking at the public parking occupancy. On the north side, we are peaking at 80% of the parking supply occupied. Here, it's peaking at about 70%, again, relatively early in the day, and then declining throughout the remainder of the day. And that, again, is another key consideration for us as to how that parking is being used. A little different dynamic in terms of the on-street parking on the north side. During the daytime hours, we're only peaking at about 50%, and even at their max occupancy, it's only at about 70%. So again, if someone, the rule of thumb, again, a best practice is you would want about 85% or 15% vacancy in order to facilitate someone being able to find a parking space. If I've got about 15% vacancy and you control it like that, I'm not ending up circling the blocks, and that's what creates a lot of traffic congestion when folks have to circle. You know, those are the spots they want, And so they'll circle waiting, hoping a spot will open up. At the level of occupancy that we're seeing during the daytime on the south side and virtually any time on the north side, the on-street parking is not an issue. And again, I make that point on the south side. On the south side, your daytime on-street occupancy is working just fine. It's during those evening hours. Looking at that peak day, what we are finding in terms of the occupancy, again, a lot of this occupancy, this peak occupancy, is the commuter areas, the block, the long narrow block to the along the tracks to the west, the commuter lot, even the library, the front portion of the library lot is that other large red area. That was seeing a lot of utilization. And you know, one of the things that we did see there is, I mean, it didn't seem that was all necessarily library parkers. I mean, there may have been folks taking advantage of that, but that's, you know, that's something that the library would have to control. The square footage that we had for the north side, about 327,000 square feet, broken out as you see there, and taking that model and applying that to our parking demand. Again, the columns in orange represent the observed numbers, and the line in blue represents our calculated demand. Again, a good correlation between what we're seeing as a calculation in the demand and what is actually observed. When we apply the model to the north side, about 1,489 is our total demand. On a gross basis, we've got about 850 surplus spaces on the north side of downtown. Even when we subtract the surplus private spaces, we still have a surplus at peak time of over 500 spaces on the north side of downtown. North side really should not be an issue in terms of the amount of available public parking over there. Looking at that surplus deficit map, again, look, the blocks, most of those areas are in green. The block with the north lot on it is block 5 with 603 spaces, and then 2 blocks with deficits. And again, that block 8, that is using residential, that is using parking in the north garage. So they don't have the capacity for all the residents, but they are using adjacent capacity. Some of the recommendations that came out of this. And again, a lot of this is with what we're seeing, it is how do we manage the parking that we have. So one of the things that came out is signage. It really is critical. Folks have to understand where the parking is available in order to navigate that and not looking for those spaces on the street. One of the things when we first started this project, we were welcoming Mr. Enright, and they were showing us they were thinking about some blade signs. Yes, absolutely, you know, something that stands out from the garage, because with the Vale garage particularly, there is nothing there if I'm looking down the street to tell me that that is a public parking facility. If I'm on Vale and I see the bridge going over to Dutton Tower, I may be thinking, okay, that's a garage for them if I'm unfamiliar with the downtown. So to really make that clear that where that parking is available. Consistent signs. Again, one of the things that we like to see is once a person has, as they're entering a town, they'll see the P symbol, and there's standards for that. Now I know to look for that for the parking, and we put that on the signs, and we direct folks, here's where the parking is, and here's what the permitted parking is, whether that's 2-hour parking, 4-hour parking, 3-hour parking, what have you. Make it clear so that I don't have to sit there and try to figure out what are you trying to tell me. And we did find some issues in that, and those were in the report as well. One of the other things is assigning names. Right now, Lot S, Lot E, that doesn't tell me anything. One of the things we like to see is you name that with, that's the Dale Campbell lot, the North Dutton lot. It really helps someone being able to navigate, or someone to help them, where is that parking? Well, I think I parked on the North Dutton lot. Okay, this is where that is, or this is where you park. So that's one of the things that we like to see. We think in the garages is, and I did this driving the garages we were doing the counts, clearly indicate what the permitted parking is. Am I on a floor that this is permit parking? Is this 4-hour or 3-hour parking? Is this daily fee parking? Is this free parking? What is it? Make it on the beams, on the columns, very clear so that there is no ambiguity as, am I allowed to park here? You know, if someone comes in and they get a parking ticket, and we did see enforcement staff, you know, people parking, you know, because they did not have a permit, parking on the permit floors. So we think that has to be clear, not only on beams and columns, but then on the stairs and elevator towers. As you're walking out, yes, okay, I was allowed to park here, this is permit parking or daily fee parking. And again, make it very clear with a consistent series of signs for that. As I mentioned before, the Vale garage, as you're driving into that, 150 spots, I've got to get up to at least the 4th floor before I may find parking. I'm going past the floors, I can't park there. A parking guidance sign. Before you even enter that garage, it's going to tell you there is parking available on what floors that is. And if we have, and we made the point in the report, if it's on levels 2 and 3, that has to say permit parking. It has to be clear that, okay, I have to go past that, I have to go up to the 4th floor. Oh, okay, there's 200 spaces, 300 spaces up above there, and I'm going to be able to find parking instead of that frustration of circulating up. And it's like, geez, am I going to find parking? You know, I'm supposed to meet friends, you know, and I'm gonna exit the garage before I even get up there. So that's one of the things that we recommend. Vale garage initially, as budgets allow, put that system in other garages. It would be simpler in the Evergreen garage because you only got the 1 floor, and that probably caters more to the movie theaters, which is going to be in the evening. So there would just be, you know, perhaps spaces available with a number. It could be a much simpler system. Payment recommendations. Right now, there's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of things. The antiquated system of stuffing the bill into the slot. You know, there's a system of pay stations. You could put those, you know, at the train station. You can put those at various points in the lot. They could still work with the system that you have of each space already numbered. What a lot of communities are going to, it's pay by plate. And you enter your license plate number, and then you know, you have to remember that. And what a lot of recommendations is maybe take a picture of your plate, but you enter that. But again, a system like this would work with the system you already have because everything is already numbered, and that would work well if you partner with a pay-by-phone provider. In a lot of communities, you can pull out your cell phone, you set up an account with them, and you enter your parking session. And you just pull it up and it says, okay, I've got an account. You enter that. I was out in Flagstaff a few weeks ago doing some work there. They had a system pay by phone, and as we were doing our accounts, it just made it easier. I just downloaded the app onto my phone, and I was able to use it, and it was very simple. There's a couple vendors there, pay by phone, Park Mobile are a couple of them. There's other ones out there. And for most of those systems, there's no cost to the village. You partner with a pay-by-phone provider, and what happens is the patron, they pay a small convenience fee. So if you have $2 daily fee and they want to use their phone, they might pay a 25-cent or 35-cent convenience fee for that. And so they would just do that and pay that, and it doesn't cost the village anything. So that's just another alternative. Some of the other, and again, this is going back to some of the other observations that we have. One of the things that the on-street parking, particularly on the south side, became very congested in the evening. Now, certainly some of that is due to the level of activity that you're seeing with more folks coming down to the shops and restaurants. But we also find in communities where you do have restaurants, what that could also be is you could have restaurant staff taking in those nice convenient on-street spaces. They're showing up at 3, 4, 5 o'clock for their shift. If they can get one of those spots, they're taking a nice prime spot away from a customer. So one of our recommendations there is perhaps considering extending that. Right now, that 2-hour parking limit goes away at 7 o'clock. If we extend that to 8 o'clock, it's going to make them think twice as to whether I should be taking that spot or going someplace else. One of the other things we noticed is there was most of the on-street stall markings were very good, and those help for the efficient use of that prime curb space. If when you've got those stalls, that is a designated spot. When it isn't clear, what'll happen is this car will mispark, and they may be taking spots so that now that next spot, someone can't park there, or someone will try to squeeze in, and now I've got a car, and boy, when I want to leave, I can't get out of my stall. So we think that that's one of the things that we'd like to see. We'd like to see that you have those, which you do. There are a few areas where you notice they are faded, and they should probably be looked at at least on an annual basis. The 2-hour time limit is another recommendation. If that isn't successful, the way you manage parking is you go to a monetary system. You know, there's talk when parking's free and abundant, municipalities really don't have to do too much. As parking becomes more congested, you implement a series of rules and regulations in order to try to manage it. Again, we think if we can get enough of those spaces opened up so that we have some surplus capacity in those on-street spaces by extending that 2-hour limit, that would be the best thing. If not, we may have to go to a monetary system where we're charging for those spaces in order to manage that prime resource. And again, we looked at initial rates. The utilization that we saw, the on-street parking on the south side of downtown was operating fine during the daytime, that 2-hour limit. So we may only have to have that paid parking in the on-street in the evening hours. So we looked at, if we did that, you know, perhaps $2 an hour in order to manage that. The other thing that we noticed is the 4-hour limit in the shopper parking. We generally recommend against a 4-hour limit. And the reason is because it just makes it really easy for an employee to take a prime spot. I can come in, I might have to go out and move my car once during my 8-hour shift into another spot. And going back to what we were seeing in terms of that arrival pattern, what an employee can do is they can come up, and I don't want to pick on employees, but it's one of the things that we find, again, when you have a constrained resource, is they can take one of those shopper spaces. They can park there. At 12 o'clock, they can take their car and they can go up and they can park where the parking is now free after 12 o'clock. They're getting free parking, but they've also, during those morning hours, they've taken a prime spot. So we think if we reduce that to 3 hours, that would facilitate, you know, it's going to make it more difficult for an employee, and so we generally recommend against 4-hour and have a 3-hour parking for those spaces. The other thing that we were looking at is perhaps extending that 3-hour parking and have that go until 8 o'clock. Again, we don't want those early arriving restaurant staff being able to take a prime spot away from a customer visitor. If we can extend that a little bit later for those 3-hour spaces, they're going to hopefully go to where we want them to go, further up into the garage, and leave those prime spaces available. We did think that the 4-hour parking, because it's more conducive to the movie theater, we'd have to maintain that in the Evergreen garage, but we'd have to monitor that for abuse by employees. And then the last thing was we suggested is rather than have the free parking at 12 o'clock, extend that. It doesn't start until 3 o'clock. Again, we're trying to, how do we use the system so we're not chasing employees from one place to another, but get them to park where we want them to park so that the most convenient spaces are available to the customers and visitors. A couple other ones. We looked at the Vale garage, and again, one of the things that the utilization analysis showed us was right now, the second and third floor of that garage is permit parking. So as residents who are parking on those floors, as they leave for the day, those spaces are now available to merchants and commuters to park in those spots. And what we think is happening, based on some of the observations, is that resident, they may come back earlier in the day before those commuters have left. So they are going up to the 4th floor and parking there where they are permitted to park. And what we found was at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, we were finding about 50 cars still there, which to us are residents. The problem is a customer visitor who's coming into that garage earlier in the day, by 7, 8 o'clock, that space has opened up. So a customer visitor who's now coming in, they go to the 2nd or 3rd floor, there's a space open, but I can't park there. That's permanent parking. So they have to go up to the 4th floor, and some of those are residents who could be parking on a lower floor, but because a space wasn't available or it was just easier to just go up to the 4th floor, they're parking there. And to us, we think if we would allocate 2 and 3 for resident parking, put our commuters and our merchants on the 4th floor. By the evening, those spaces they'll have left when I need them. So I'm getting a more efficient use of that garage. The other thing we looked at is special event parking. We would think most special events are going to occur on weekends and evenings when you're going to have the commuter spaces, but we generally recommend when you look at special event, are there opportunities for some of these private operators to use their spaces as well and to market that. Putting sandwich board signs out as parking available for, you know, this event that folks can park here. If we do have to go out even farther, depending on, I don't know what size some of your events are, but if we have to go out farther, we would have a shuttle bus, rather than have them come into the center of town, put them on the periphery of the town so that they can maximize that cycle time back to the parking lot and to the event. Just looking at the supply, again, we were showing parking could be tight on the south side, but that did not include the use of the Vale of the Village Hall garage. There's about 200 spaces there that could be used that are available during the evening hours, and we should market that and try to get folks. I would prefer to see restaurant employees parked over there, but we should have that as a parking resource that is certainly available. Some of the as I showed you on the slide, some of the privately controlled spaces, are there opportunities to work with them, perhaps with the banks, you know, bank parking only 8 to 5, after 5 o'clock public parking. Again, we've seen this in other communities to market that as available public parking. It's trying to use the resources that you have as efficiently as possible. There's lots just on the other side of the tracks, on the north side of the downtown. Market those as available parking. Let's try to use that. It is not that far. Yes, you have to cross the tracks, and some people may not like that, but it really, the distance to some of your other facilities and some of the events is not that bad. Excuse me, there is additional capacity for us. What all this is designed is we are looking to see, before we say, you know, go and build a new parking garage, use the facilities that you have as efficiently as possible. I was doing some work for another community a few years ago, and they were maxed out, and we told them you're going to have to start thinking about having to build a garage in your community, but they had to do some other things first in order to be able to afford it. Only about 30% of their spaces were paid, and we said you need to get the rest of these spaces. And as we were talking about that, the mayor says, why would I build a new parking garage when in 5 years we're going to have fully autonomous vehicles? And I told him, I said, well, I think you're a little optimistic for that, and I mean, what we're hearing is that is 15, maybe 20 years out. So it's coming, but it is not going to happen overnight. And we look at that in terms of building a garage that's got a 40-year lifespan. You know, what do you do with that difference? They are expensive facilities. So we are recommending let's look to use the parking that we have now as efficiently as possible before we go to look to invest in additional parking. Then lastly, looking at handicap accessible spaces, again, just monitor that you're complying with the ADA code for that, that those spaces are available. And then the village also asked us to look at downtown parking ratios. Shared use, which is what our model shows. It is considering the fact that spaces used by one group can be used by a group with a different peak. For example, the movie theater, those spaces can be used during the day by office users. Later in the day, those spaces have left, those same spaces can be used by movie patrons. And just trying to, again, how do we use the parking without overbuilding what we have? And then lastly, what we're finding too is as developers come into town or want to develop residential parking, we saw that on the slide where we were looking at whether parking is provided. What we're finding is recommended is unbundled parking. Rather than with your apartment, you get 2 parking spaces. Well, no. With your apartment, you get your apartment. If you want parking, it's going to cost you this much, and let the market dictate. If I have to pay separately for that spot, maybe I'm going to look, okay, maybe I don't need 2, maybe I use 1, maybe I can use an alternative. So that's just something that we're seeing in other developers across the country as we unbundle that parking. So with that, if there's any questions. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Eklund.
I think staff had a couple more comments.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and members of the board, trustees, and the public. Just had a couple things I wanted to share with everybody about some of the recommendations. Keep in mind that the recommendations that have been discussed by Dave Burr are recommendations from the consultant. The village staff is still evaluating those with the board and the public. There are certain recommendations, though, that we would like to implement fairly soon, depending upon the budget, that we would like to classify as phase 1 improvements. Some of the signage that we'd like to do in phases, but sooner and later, is additional pylon signs on the garages, the Vale garage and eventually the North garage, as well as a series of signs that are on poles adjacent to some of the surface lots the village controls, like Lot E and A along the railroad tracks and across the street from the underground garage as well. We've done some preliminary designs and gotten some quotes on what it would cost to do some of this signage. This could be a sign that we've designed to hang on the entrance of the Vale garage. It's about 18 feet tall. It would be affixed to the stair tower, probably about 15, 16 feet above the ground at the low point, going up to probably approximately 30, 32 feet. So it'd be a fairly large sign, internally illuminated. We have $25,000 in the current fiscal year budget for that project, and it would cost $22,000 approximately. We've gotten some quotes on that. So this is some of the signage that we think would help identify the garages. Of course, we all know this is a garage if you've been here, but there's a lot of customers coming to our downtown for the first time. And we've got, this is more of a zoomed-in rendition of it. To the left would be signage put on the garages, and then the right is signage that we'd have at entries to some of our surface lots that we'd like to, that are used now, but certainly not to the capacity levels. This is a rendering of some of those entry surface lots along the tracks. The upper one is Lot A, which is at Vale, heading west along the tracks, and then the lower one is Lot E, which is adjacent to Davis. This is just a perspective of the Vale garage looking north and south with that sign affixed. If we move forward with this project, which we intend to, we're first going to have our Public Works Department do kind of a mock-up banner to hang up there at different heights and go out there and see where it's most visible. Maybe it'll be a little higher than this, than shown on the renderings. So we want to make sure it's clearly visible from a distance, hopefully, a block or two at least. And then the north garage is similar type scenario with the pylon blade sign rather. Some of the costs to implement what we're indicating as phase 1, and in the recommendations section, those were highlighted in yellow. As I mentioned, the Vale garage blade sign, $22,000 per sign. The north garage, potentially 2 signs. Certainly the Vale garage we think is the higher priority of the two, given just the usage of that garage, as Dave Burr was alluding to earlier, with so many customers coming down, as we're well aware. The pole-mounted signs for the Evergreen garage, we wouldn't do a pylon sign because it's underground, so you'd have a pole-mounted sign probably right across from the entrance. But we're also working with the ownership of and management company of the shopping center across the street on possibly doing better signage for that garage because it's literally hidden underground, and the signage is pretty minimal. Lot A and E and H are all on the tracks, doing anywhere from 1 to 2 of those pole signs. That's another $84,000. Assigning names to the lots versus lettering, we're still evaluating that. We think it's a potentially good idea, but that would just amount to changing some signage, nothing significant. Clearly indicating the parking garage levels on beams and columns and stairs within the garage, we absolutely want to do. That's just basically painting a large 1, 2, 3, 4 within some of the beams of the garage. We're not going to put it all over. There aren't going to be hundreds of these, but just a key decision points when people come into the garage. When you're going from 1 to 2, have one of the beams when you come on level 2 say level 2. And we may even add, paint permit parking at that point, or just say level 2. And then by the garage stair towers have a big 2 right next to the entryway. So it's very obvious to people what level they're on, because again, there are a lot of new customers to the downtown that haven't used the garage very often, and it can get a little confusing as to where you're at or what level you're on. Again, that's more internal. We'd have to evaluate if Public Works could do that, but basically we're talking about really some painting. The guidance system that Dave Burr and the consultant is recommending for the Vale garage, the estimate to do that system is about $100,000. That consists of 4 signs at the 4 entryways into the garage, which would have each level indicated, and it would tell you how many spaces are available real time. And that system works with a series of cameras at every ramp and every drive aisle within the garage at each end, and that system counts the cars via the camera system and gives us real-time data that is reflected on the 4 signs that would be at the 4 entry levels of the garage downstairs. The great thing about these programs too is that you can track data then, and we would have infinite number of counts every day of the year and every time of day for going into the future. So that's one of the great values to that system. There is a more expensive system that is probably 2.5 times that amount for the garage, where you would have a light over every single stall, either red or green, depending upon whether there's an empty space. And it also gives you that real-time data on signage at the entryways. But we don't think that there's too much of a bang for the buck for that versus this system, because they'll still give you the same accurate data, and that's what we want to communicate to people is when they come in, they don't get frustrated going past 2 and 3 because they know that there's X number of spaces on 4 and 5. So at this point, staff's recommending moving forward subject to budgeting for all these numbers, the Vale garage, and then in future years, the other garages as well. Electronic pay stations, we've touched on that. We've actually been looking at this for probably a couple years, I think, in terms of the parking committee, the staff parking committee. The estimate from our consultant is about $170,000. So we're going to continue to evaluate that and what system might work best if the board chose to move forward with that. And then some of the other last 2 items here is just really marketing and reassigning merchants and commuters to the 4th and 5th floor, as Dave Burr was alluding to. But the total of these phase 1 signage program would be about $420,000. But certain ones we'd be looking at doing hopefully sooner than later in 2019, subject to the board funding it. We're looking at different funding sources right now, and that's one of the recommendations is to move forward with coming up with an implementation plan for these improvements and for these changes in the system. We haven't decided or made recommendations yet on whether or not there should be $2 for on-street parking. We're not saying that at this point. It might come to that in the future, but that's not something staff is recommending right now. However, we do think that moving the enforcement to 8 o'clock at night was probably something we would want to do, but we'd still want to have that discussion with the board and the public. So that's all I had at this point, so I'd open it up for questions.
Just one more comment, and to be clear, what we're looking for is, aside from general questions and feedback, is just the direction to develop an implementation plan. We're not looking for final go-ahead on any of these items, but, for us to kind of come up with a concept, including funding for these concepts, if the board is interested in them.
All right, thank you, Randy. Well, Bill, thank you for that explanation of how the parking guidance signs works. That was going to be one of my questions. I didn't know how that works, so thank you. And thank you to Mr. Burr and Rich and Associates for this very detailed report. I was curious as to how you were going to boil this down into a short presentation, but nice job with that. And in the very comprehensive list of recommendations that you've got in the last part of the study. I think that's very helpful. I think this has been money very well spent on behalf of our residents and non-residents who often use our parking facilities. In fact, one of the primary complaints that I don't get a lot of complaints as mayor, but one of the more frequent complaints I get is from non-residents who come to Arlington Heights to attend a show at the Metropolis or a movie at the movie theaters or just to dine downtown, and they get a parking ticket. And, really frustrating when you had a great evening in the great community of Arlington Heights and you come back to your car, you get a parking ticket. And so I get the angry emails that we're never coming back to your town. And so I'm very appreciative of your efforts in helping us come to some solutions to those problems, and certainly a big part of that is signage. Just not really understanding on the behalf of non-residents exactly where to park and where you can legally park. So I think it's been money very well spent. I think it's important sometimes to hire somebody outside to take a big picture look, because sometimes we just get too close to the issues. And so I think it has been very worthwhile, this whole effort.
Thank you very much.
So with that, I'll open it up to the board for questions. Trustee Tinaglia.
Thanks, Mayor. So I have 2 pages of notes and thoughts here, and I'm going to try and be really quick about going through just a couple of them. Bill, so with everything that just got shared with us here tonight, what do you as staff think is the most interesting or the most important information that we got out of this? What, if you could boil it down to 1 or 2 items, what do you think happened here?
Well, I think one of the key things is we've got a very successful downtown. We all know that, and that's reflected in the parking demand, especially on the south side of downtown. But I think the key thing is that if we utilize our existing parking more efficiently, we should be okay. But as part of that, we've got to articulate where the parking is and when it's available to any customers, whether they're first time or returning. I think a big part of that when we have events like Sounds of Summer, which is, a couple months out of the year, 2 days a week, we've really got to promote Lot S on the north side of downtown, Lot A, which is along the railroad tracks, along adjacent to the Jewel, just north of it, and also the parking facility here. So to me, that's the most important thing that came out of it, is that we've got the parking here. We've just got to be a lot more efficient with it and utilize it better.
Okay. And Bill, right? Oh, I'm sorry, what was your first name? Dave. With what you just spent all this time working on, if you had to boil it down to, in a nutshell, what are the 1 or 2 most important things that you would say to us to say, you really, this is it. This is where you really got to start. What is it?
I think it kind of plays off what Bill has said. It's management. It is getting the folks to park. We are trying to make the parking as convenient as possible for folks. I mean, if I come and I find a parking space, I've been hunting for a parking space, and I come out and get a ticket, it does leave a very bad taste in the mouth. So we want to manage the parking so that those customers are not circling the block looking for a parking space. So it is into that parking guidance, that parking signage, to manage the parking so that customers are going to be able to find a parking space relatively convenient, and the long-term employees, they are parking where they need to park and using the system the way it is intended to be using. You have to have rules. In a parking system, there has to be rules. It's not always convenient to some, but that's what you have to have.
Right. Great. So, well, I'm really happy that we have this. I can't tell you, I think on behalf of, being here all my life and still not knowing where I can park in many cases, and I use that downtown, and I know a lot of people who do, and as the mayor said, it can be really, really frustrating and awful at times to go and keep looking around for a street parking spot because you don't know exactly where you can park inside and what the rules are. Mm-hmm. So I happen to agree with both of you guys. I mean, if that's staff's perspective, I think you're right on, and your perspective as well. I think that's our biggest issue. I think the jury's still out, probably, on whether or not, I think if I heard you right, $156 surplus on the worst night in the Vale garage. I look at that and I squint when I hear that because I can't believe it. Now, maybe when these things happen and things get rejuggled around and people move over and the right stalls are available in the right places at the right times, maybe that'll be more obvious. But I think if you asked most of the people in the audience here and others around, they'd say, I don't know if I believe that. They might say it a little more harsh than that. But either way, if that's true, great. But I think you're right on track. We've got to find a way to make that more obvious.
Excuse me, Mayor. Just if I could just, Jim, Just for clarification, was that 100, did you say 156 spots
Extra.
surplus just in the
Surplus.
Vale garage or in the total south
No,
end of
That was in
downtown?
the Vale garage. We did an analysis of those transient floors.
Yeah, and there was another number that you said, it was like 214 total surplus on the worst night. So of the 214 total surplus on the worst night, 156 of them were the Vale garage.
There's two different numbers that you have to look at. The 156 is looking at what we actually observed. The 214 is a calculated number.
I
It is
see.
taking the demand on each block, applying it to the private first, and then throwing out those surplus spaces. And I think I was actually looking at the data. What is happening, I think, is you've got some folks, even if we were supposedly throwing out the surplus private spaces, you have people parking in Chase Bank. I mean, that lot was being used in the evening, even though the bank is obviously closed. People are taking advantage of those spaces. So there is some utilization of some of that private spaces, but that 214 is a calculated number.
Okay. When you use something called a modified average stay over 5 hours, what is that? Like, who does that? Who stays more than 5 hours?
Well,
Is it the employees?
That's why I deducted those spaces over 5 hours. If you looked at those results, you had I think when I looked at, there was maybe 50 responses that stayed 6, 7, 8 hours, and to us, those types of stays just don't seem consistent for what you're coming down in downtown Arlington Heights. If you're coming down for a show, even a dinner, you're not going to be here 8 hours. So if we deduct those spaces beyond 5 hours, we're getting down to that 2 hour and 47-minute average stay.
So would you say that, and this is just a hypothetical question, is the 2 hour number that we have the right number, or should it be, if your number is 2 hours and 47 minutes is the average, should it be 3 hours?
I'm sorry.
Talking about the daytime,
The daytime.
2 hour limit
Yeah.
on street?
Yeah. What, if the average is 2 hour 47, that's the adjusted one, right? Minus the people who are parking that are there for 8 hours that probably are employees or something. Is the 2 hour number the right number for our downtown, or should it be a different number?
No, 2 hours. 2 hours for on-street parking is the appropriate number that you want for on-street parking.
Okay.
Those are the spaces that are the prime. Those are the spaces that you want to turn over.
I see.
For longer stays, you want people to park in off-street locations. Your
Garage.
your daily fee spaces. We looked at on the on-street spaces. We looked at when we see a car, and what we saw was the average time that we were seeing a car in the same spot was 1.28 times, and it was consistent across both the north and south. If we looked at when we see that car and we say, okay, let's assume that car, by the first time I see him, he's been sitting there for 45 minutes already. I come by again in another hour because that's the way we did our circuits. So now he's been there for an hour and 45 minutes. I don't see him again. And what we found is if we assume that first time he's been there 45 minutes, my average stay is only 61 minutes. If I assume that car has been there for an hour the first time I see him, like I went by and then he pulled in right behind me, and then by the time I come around again, he's already been parked an hour, my average stay for my on-street spaces is only an hour and 18 minutes for my average. So 2 hours is an appropriate time for on-street parking.
Okay, I'm with you. Okay, understand. I like a lot of things that were talked about tonight. I don't think I need to go over too many more of these notes here, but I'm all for the idea of reassigning and relocating. I love the idea of having this sign with the phone app, and the fact that we could keep track of the parking stalls, what's open and what's available on what floor. I think that alone would be an incredible investment for the health of our downtown. So for my money, that's where I'd love to see this go as soon as possible. But I'll stop now and allow the others to speak. Thank you.
Trustee Scaletta.
Thank you, Mayor. For clarification, the pay by phone is for the daily fee spaces only. So they wouldn't be used in the actual garages, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
The fifth floor has daily fee.
Well, but it would just be for the people that have daily fee in the 5th floor, in the garage.
Okay. Thank you for your report. Lots of information. And I want to kind of go through it, and I have some questions for you, and I have some questions for staff. So when you were going through your analysis, and Hey Nani was not open yet, and the AT&T building is vacant.
I'm sorry.
The AT&T building was vacant, correct? Okay. So, and you were trying to make some assumptions. Do you think that the AT&T building, if it was occupied, would suck up the remaining surplus during the day, or you think that there's still more room?
Well, yeah, you have capacity during the day, and I understand is the AT&T building, and it led into one of our other analysis. If that building is redeveloped as office space, they have the agreement. There's an agreement with AT&T in the village for 187 permits that would have to be located into the more than likely the Vale garage. So that would take some of that capacity. You still have capacity during the daytime hours. Your problem is occurring during the evening hours when you're getting tight. So that demand during the day, I think you'd be able to absorb that. And Hey Nani is actually occurring in nighttime hours. So 2 different times they can share the same spaces.
Right. And so the AT&T agreement goes with the building?
We're in discussions with the legal department on what that agreement does or does not allow. We do have a preliminary proposal from somebody on that site. They would, the current proposal, they would not need anywhere near as many as what the agreement allows. So we're talking about what we need to do to renegotiate that.
Okay. And with the Hey Nani, obviously, so far very successful. And, you know, I think that what we're going to find is that there's probably going to be a little bit of overlap between that business and some of the others, as I think people kind of move around a little bit. So I'm a little concerned, though, that with Hey Nani opening, that, you know, our surplus gets reduced. And I was happy to see that the dates that you selected, and I'm sure it was with staff, that they were spread out and that they were during peak times. Because I've seen other parking studies done during bizarre months like October, and it's kind of really difficult to appreciate the data. So thank you for the timing that you did, and thank you for the long hours that it took to do the counts, because I think it means a lot more to us, at least to me, that the information is factual because it was done over long periods of time, over multiple days. So, you know, you talked several times about private lots. So how do you foresee the village working with, like, property owners on utilizing those lots outside of events, or don't you?
We have recommended that to a number of communities. It's starting a dialogue as to, you know, what can we do to, you know, it's how, you know, you negotiate with them. You know, what can we do in order to use your parking when you don't need it during those evening and weekend hours. Again, those particularly the banks. As I said, it looked like Chase Bank is, there's a lot of parking we noticed in their lot. I mean, certainly after hours, they are apparently looking the other way. I did see some other, you know, Citibank, their lot right across from the theater, that was virtually vacant. So, you know, and again, they're not using it, but it's the village approaching them and say, you know, can we use this parking, or can we market this as public parking after hours, after you don't need it? And then it's what you might be able to do to incentivize to allow them to do that.
Okay. So this question will tie into the next one. Did you have, in your recommendation, I saw nothing about, like, valet corners or doing anything with valets?
Well, we did, there is the one valet operation that we did see that's right at the corner of Vale and
Davis, or Wing.
Yeah, that. Where there is a valet operation, one of the things that we recommend that they do is the valet operator, one is they have to have on file with the village where are they going to park those cars. Is that going to be in a private lot, then they have to show you that they have an agreement to use that private lot. If it's gonna be village parking, well, then you've gotta know that as to where that's gonna be. And, you know, where are those spaces? You know, I always bring up when you talk about valet, I did work a few years ago in another, it was a much smaller community, but they had a high restaurant component, and they had a valet operation. And I was standing there one evening, and a fella pulls up, drops his car off, valet gets in his car, and I kid you not, if he drove that car 50 feet and put it into a public lot space right next to where I was standing, and it was like, there is a lot up the hill there that is a public lot that nobody knows of. Why don't you drive the car up there and try to use that? So that is certainly something you can do, because you can park those cars a little bit tighter than that, but you have to have a formal agreement as to where those spaces are.
Agreed. But don't you think that that might be one of the recommendations? I mean, you didn't make it a recommendation, so you don't think that, but wouldn't one of the recommendations that might make sense, you're the expert,
Well, yeah,
would be to have, maybe valet corners where you utilize some of the private property, and maybe the landowner feels a little bit more comfortable that, the only people going onto that property are from like the valet company.
That is certainly, yeah. But I said, we saw the one valet operation, that's why we did not make another one. But that you could add additional thing and get folks. The only thing that I did notice is when we did see that valet operation, there was a little bit of congestion in that corner. I mean, as we were doing it would make it kind of hard, because there was 2 or 3 cars lined up there waiting for the valet. It does have a problem with traffic, so you have to watch that as well.
Sure. Well, but if you're going to have valets in the downtown, you might allow for maybe multiple spaces. I think that's part of the problem at Shaku,
that goes into that
is that they don't have the space because it was never designed like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trustee Scaletta, if I could add to that, we've actually had some internal discussions a little bit about the idea, and this was brought up by several businesses downtown that propose some ideas for the downtown parking when we started the study. But one was to have kind of a community valet at the probably at the Vale garage, where it would be village probably contracting with someone to provide valet service, and you could leave your car at a designated point, probably in front of the garage somewhere, and then it could be valeted maybe up to the 5th floor, or maybe we would have them go to lot A, which goes pretty far west, but so it's probably 2 to 2.5 blocks to walk. So that's something that we could certainly evaluate at staff to make it more convenient for people, so they don't have to wind their way up a garage.
Sure. I just found it interesting that there wasn't really mentioned, but I appreciate it. In your recommendation, there's no talk in there about possibly, trying to adjust, maybe moving some of the commuters from the south garage to the north garage, or did I miss that? I mean, there seems to be a surplus on the north side. Does it make sense to try and move some of those commuters?
It does, because your parking is, again, you have capacity on both the north and south during the daytime hours. It is, if there is any additional demand, you might need to move that. Right now, we didn't see that impact during the daytime hours, that we would have to do that. Now, if that AT&T building opened up and you did have the demand, that the 187 permits, then it might make to move some of those commuters to the north side. But
okay, and I'm not recommending it. I'm just trying to understand that we talk about, or you talked about in your report, the possibility of moving them, to higher floors so that people aren't passing them. Maybe that is part of a solution as well.
The reason we were recommending to move those to the higher floors is to keep the 2nd and 3rd floor available for the resident parking. So a resident, when they leave, when they come back, there is parking for them, and they're not going up to a floor where once as a resident, once I parked on that 4th floor, if I get back at 2 o'clock, my car is going to sit on that 4th floor, and then a space may open up on a lower floor. A transient person or a restaurant place cannot park in a permit space, right, because those are reserved. That I'm not going to come back and move my car down to the thing. So what we say is what's happening is that resident, if he's parking on an upper floor, he is effectively taking 2 spots. So we're trying to free up those spaces on the 4th floor, give those commuters during the day. By the time I need those in the evening, those commuters have left, and those spaces are now open.
Can we agree that the 5th floor of the Vale garage is all open air?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a commuter. I live in town, and I'm now buying a permit to park. And so when it snows or it rains, I'm dealing with all that. I think that might be a little bit frustrating to commuters, that, you know, they've now paid for this space, and we're moving them to an area where their vehicle is open to the elements, and they have to deal with it even though they're commuting, and they have to walk through all of it. Now when they get to their car, they're dealing with that as well. So just one of the thoughts I had. You know, your 9.1 recommendation of employees parking at the Village Hall garage, I think is a good one for those that work at the town square and maybe relatively close by, but I don't see anybody who's working at Vale and Campbell parking all the way over here and walking over there. I know it's not that far, but I just don't see it being realistic, especially the late nights that they work. So just wanted to mention that. You had some open dialogue with some of the downtown business owners and managers and employees. Is that fair to say? Or was that all online employees?
That was just online, the employees.
Okay. So when you were talking to the downtown businesses, they, I'm sure, are frustrated because they hear this perception that there's not enough parking. Mm-hmm. And part of it is real perception, because, you know, if people don't go all the way up into the garage, they don't necessarily find it. Did they have other ideas for solutions, or did they talk about how they communicate where the parking is to their customers?
It says my memory back going several months back. Well, there was some frustration in what they felt. That I think there was some frustration that the village hadn't gone enough, and you know, to a lot of folks like this is, you know, when you think that you have tight parking, it's just like, well, we just have to build more parking, we have to add more parking, and you know, I always try to tell them, you have to understand, you know, what the cost of a parking facility is. They are not cheap facilities, and that we are trying to see how we can manage that. I recall a couple of businesses. One was.
Please don't say their names, because they may not appreciate that. You can say a restaurant or.
Well, it was a retail shop.
All right.
And there was just some frustration that they would see people parking for extended periods of time, and it creates frustration for their customers being able to get to their shop.
Absolutely. Were you stunned, as I was, that the response to one of your questionnaires is that, does your employer have a policy of where you should park? Were you stunned by that? Like, it was 96% have no policy?
No policy, yeah. Yeah, that's, but you know, in a lot of communities, that's typical. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, I talk to businesses, and, you know, it's very few businesses will actually, you know, they say, I can't be out there, you know, if I have a policy, I'm not being able to monitor, are they actually doing it? If I tell them, no, you can't park on the street. I did a study just a few months back, and I finished it, and there was one restaurant owner. He had made an agreement with a private business for his staff to park there. And he was, because their parking was very tight as well. And he tells his employees, you park, you don't park on the street, you don't park in the public lots, you go down here, and it is not as convenient, but you park there. If I catch you anywhere else, it's grounds for dismissal. I mean, he is trying to work within the community to do that. But a lot of businesses said to me, I don't have the time to monitor it.
I had the same policy, or similar policy that he did. When I operated the theater previously, they had to park over at the village garage, and anybody who wanted to buy a ticket that parked on the top floor where it's 45 minutes only, we would not sell them a ticket until they moved their vehicle. Now, I wasn't, you know, people weren't really thrilled about that, but we need that parking to be open for all the other businesses around to be successful, because, you know, if they're not successful, they're going to leave. So, you know, there were a couple things. Did you get a chance to look at any of the websites of any of the businesses downtown?
No, I did not.
Okay. So I can't find a business in the downtown that tells people where to park. Not one. That's amazing. And it's amazing that nobody has a policy of where their employees should park. And not that they have to monitor it, because that is, that's the part. How are they going to monitor it? They're supposed to drive around and look, but not to even have a policy of where people should park is really disappointing. So if staff could, when you're communicating through your newsletters to the businesses downtown, to encourage them to put on their websites where, convenient parking is for the downtown, or at least have a link to a site that we create so that it'll tell people, that would be fantastic. And to encourage them to have a policy. We can't mandate it, but we could encourage it. The municipal code about the bundling, the only thing the staff has to review this and analyze that, because you have one part of the code that says you need to have this much parking per unit, and then he's also suggesting that we don't bundle it. Those two don't go together. You could have a surplus of parking in a building that we required by code. Follow? Right? Okay. And I'm wrapping up. Okay, so these recommendations that you threw at us tonight, how are you funding these?
So that's part of the implementation plan that we have to develop. We have about $50,000 over the next 5 years as just a placeholder in the CIP. We knew that wasn't going to be sufficient. The parking fund is going to have about a $3 million surplus or fund balance, I should say. So, which again, that money is there to fund parking improvements. So that could be an appropriate use. We have to look at the long-term sustainability of our parking fund based on what's coming in and what's going out before we say absolutely just take it all out of there. We may look at other revenues as well, but that would be something we would look at as part of an implementation plan.
Okay, and that $3 million is also for the maintenance of the building?
Correct.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we don't go through it. All right. I'm supportive of having the availability guidance system. I think that's really important to start with the Vale Garage. I'm supportive of the blade sign on the Vale Garage and even on the North Garage. These parking lot signs that are on poles, I need a little bit more information on that. I'm not sure how. A sign on a pole could cost $14,000, like for the Evergreen Garage. I'm sure there's a little bit more to it, but I need more information on the pole-mounted signs. And the electronic pay stations, supportive of the concept, need a lot more information, and I thought we would have had it by now, but I'll continue to be patient and wait for that. But anything we can do to try and work with some of the property owners in the downtown to see if there's ways to utilize that parking, because it just sits there empty. We should do everything we can, and maybe that's through valet agreements. Maybe, if I'm a property owner, I tried to work out a deal with Citibank to utilize their parking just so people wouldn't have to go into the underground garage. And many, 10, 15 years ago, and they didn't like the idea, and their concern had to do with liability. Maybe if there was just, one company that was only going on their property each night over like a weekend, maybe they'd be more supportive of a concept like that, and with the village getting involved. But I think that, that's a resource that we need to tap into, is all of that private parking in the downtown that's not being utilized. I'm done. Sorry, Mayor.
Trustee LaBedz.
Thank you. I'll try not to be too repetitive, but I do want to say I certainly agree with what Trustee Scaletta was just talking about with the use of the existing privately owned lots. I know that people do sometimes park in the Citibank lot to go to the movies. You might not have seen it the particular days that you were there, but I know that it does happen. I know that so much of the complaints about there not being any parking is a perception issue, and I happened to read, and it was referred to me, an interesting article by also an expert in parking about on-street parking, and the perception is if there's not any on-street parking available, no empty spots, people think there is no parking. So that leads me to think they think there's no parking in the garages, they think there's no parking anywhere. And that was a very interesting discussion. That particular discussion also talked about, having paid parking spaces, which I'm not ready to go there with that, because that then often pushes people into the neighborhoods, which are so close to the downtown. So that's a whole nother issue. But, you know, so much of it really is perception. I do want to say, back to the recommendations, I wholeheartedly agree with the painting of, you know, signage in the Vale Street garage. I've said it before, we desperately need that. I live here, and though I'm fortunate that for most things that I do, I walk downtown, but sometimes I need to drive, and I can't tell the difference when it's the transition from one place to another. Or is this a place that I can actually pull in? You know, is this actually the 4th floor where I can park at this particular time? And I can't tell because there's a car here, an empty space, and a tiny little sign with it, you know, look in. So we really have to do that. I think that will help tremendously. So I'm all for that, and the idea of the blade signs to identify that these are lots that you can use. So I think those are really important. I mentioned that already. You know, you talked about the utilization of some of the other publicly owned along the tracks. Parking lot S, since that's, you know, up where I live on the north side, I see that sometimes you didn't happen to do studies when we had the main event or something really big that happens in August here, but I do see people utilizing the on-street parking and parking lot S for something really big like that, to come and even to cross the tracks. I'm sure staff is aware of that too. So it is possible to get people to, you know, to do that, especially when the streets are blocked off and they can't even drive through Campbell or Vale. So that encourages them to park where they do. But I think, again, encouraging people to, in signage that encourages them to use that. I see even with parking lot S, I have even overheard people in the evening saying to each other, or on a weekend, can I park here? Can I not park here? They can't really tell. So signage is really important for all that. But I do want to thank you. A lot of the points were already made, and I know my colleagues also want to share. And I do want to thank you for this very extensive study. I think it was really a lot. Tremendous amount of information, and I think we can utilize this going forward. But I'm also glad that you're not recommending that we build another parking structure or add on to it, because we do have things we can do to get the parking that is here and available utilized to its fullest extent. So thank you. That's all I have for now.
Trustee Blackwood.
Thank you, Mayor. Bill, when you talk about the parking blade signs on the Vale garage and maybe the north garage, are those going to be lit at night, backlit type, or maybe internally lit? Okay, and those would be, I don't know what the materials would be, but I'm sure they would be substantial. And without going into too much of a repetition, I think that the color coding for the signage in the garage is really important. But most specifically, I'm in total agreement about the guidance system. I think if there was ever one particular project that we would start with, it would be, from my perspective, after reviewing the study, it would be the blade signs. It would be certainly the color coding in the garages, and then the guidance system. And then from there, really consider how to get the parking information signs, maybe not on a pole, but I guess you'd have to use some sort of a pole. So at that point, that's really where I'd start. So I'm in favor of the recommendations.
Okay, thanks. Trustee Baldino.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I could just say ditto to what Trustee Blackwood just said. I just, the signage, that's been something that I've been talking about with folks for a long time. One thing that I do want want to add, there was some talk about moving commuters from Vale to the north lot. And if we do that, we're going to have to add more permit parking spaces there, because I can tell you from experience, that's the first lot to sell out. And, you know, it'll sell out by the first of the month. So you know, if we're going to do that, we're going to have to reduce the daily fee and the free parking there. So that's something to keep in mind. I was glad to hear some of the other comments that say it's not just people that are new to the downtown. I've heard a lot of people talking about not knowing where to park downtown from people who are residents. And so, again, signage. And I also want to echo the sentiment that I'm not in favor of charging for on-street parking downtown. That would be a last resort if we're continuing to have problems. Other than that, most of the other comments that I have written down in my notes here, they've already been covered. So thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Trustee Sidor.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, David. There were a few paragraphs in here that I had to read like 3 times over so that I understood exactly where you were going with it. So I knew you were really crunching the numbers here. So as I look at this, I look at the what we've already talked about in your one question. You know, do you feel there is enough publicly available parking for downtown Arlington Heights? And 70.84% of the people said no. So that's the perception. If we do take anything from this evening, that is, I think, in my opinion, step 1, right? We have to all agree that that's a problem. Mm-hmm. So I think what you've done here, with at least with the signage part, which I think is a good start, and I can't believe we didn't think of it beforehand. I hate to think we paid you X number of dollars to say put some signs up. That makes sense. We should have thought of that as a group earlier than that, but I think that's a good start. So let's talk about your methodology. I just have a question. So you state that you had one-on-one meetings with stakeholders, and you also mentioned in some of your comments that you saw some of our public service officers checking on cars and writing tickets. What were your how did your meeting go with the public service officers, and what did they have to say about the parking information?
Again, you're testing my memory going back. We did meet with 4 officers. We're trying to understand as to how they do their circuits. One of the things that we don't like to see when you're doing parking enforcement is a set pattern, and they did indicate that it's random. I mean, as to where they're going. We did see them all throughout town. At the time that we were doing the studies, they did say there were some issues on the north side because of the new construction of the new residential building, and I think they were a little more forgiving as to what was happening over on the north side of town than the south side. They're trying to recall what else they told me.
I was just wondering what their general thoughts were for maybe some solutions, because they are the ones who live and breathe parking all day long, however many days a week. So I didn't see any information regarding responses from our public service officers in your report. That's why I was curious. That was
just kind of background information in terms of us understanding is how they're doing their job, as to whether we need to make a recommendation that, as I said, I've done communities, and they would rotate different enforcement people doing a route, and it's every few weeks. So on this week, I know that Susan is doing it, and I know that Susan comes by here at 9:10, at 11:30. So I can go out there and just make sure that if it's paid parking, I put a nickel on the meter.
But that's not my question. My question is, did you ask our public service officers whether they had some solutions or what their observations were with the parking habits of people on the street, off the street, what their thoughts were about 3-hour parking on the street or 2-hour parking on the street, what their thoughts are with some of the recommendations that you're making here, and how that, based on their daily life in our parking garages and on the streets? Did you ask these people who live a day-to-day what they thought?
I don't recall those specific questions.
If I could, Trustee Sidor, I don't know that we would want to pay a consultant to interview staff about what they think. We can ask our staff at any time to make recommendations on parking issues, and I think as we develop the implementation plan, that will bear itself out. But I mean, we would not want to, you know, in terms of other than interviewing them for methodology, you know, paying the consultant to ask us what we think, you know, we wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But we certainly, if that's something you're interested in, can get more information as part of the implementation.
I've already interviewed the PSOs, so I've got the information that I need. But I believe that it's a resource.
Absolutely.
And,
No, you know,
and we haven't done it yet, then I'm surprised that we haven't.
Our internal parking committee includes police staff, and we talk regularly with our PSOs, along with other people internally that deal with different aspects of the parking issues, and so they're absolutely on the team.
Understood. Okay, so in one of your questions, you state that the average stay, when someone visits a resident, the average stay seemed to be less than 2 hours. Was there a follow-up question that asked if that guest would run out and move their car so they wouldn't get a ticket within that 2 hours, so that because they know it's a 2-hour limit and move their car? Or was it because you made an assumption after that? And I felt that that assumption was a little bit of a leap because I live downtown and I know what my friends do when they visit, and I know what other friends do when they visit, you know, my other friends that live downtown, and I know people shuffle cars all the time. So I think that assumption was a little bit of a leap. Could you address that?
We did not do a follow-up question. We asked the question is, you know, and I said, when I saw that, the question that their guests were parking on street, you know, to me that is, they're understanding the 2-hour limit for the on-street spaces.
Okay. I think that's an issue that maybe could be followed up on, because I do think a lot of visitors who stay longer than 2 hours do run around and move their cars, similar to the way employees from some of the shops downtown and businesses downtown also move their cars. Another question that I have for you is some of the recommendations here. I think that if you change, and I understand the logic behind reducing the 4-hour limit to a 3-hour limit, but I think that we would all, you know, there's a mob mentality in this country now. I don't know if you've seen the news, but I think that we would be run out of town if we changed that 4-hour limit to a 3-hour limit on the first floor of Vale Street. And we have a business owner here. I don't know if she could comment later, but I don't think that is a viable solution for that first floor. I understand the logic behind it, you know, trying to keep people from, you know, doing what you were saying, stay there till, you know, for 4 hours and moving it up to the 4th floor or above after noon when it's free, and then changing that from noon to 3 or whatever you said. But I just think we would be run out of town if we changed that limit. There was a couple other items here. I thought it was a very good, you know, presentation here. Tons of information. Now, you said that you're discounting these 4, 5, and 6-hour visits. You know, we have an aging community in our village, and some of the people who live downtown are senior citizens. And some daughter might bring the grandchildren over to visit. How do you account for that? Because I would imagine that might be part of the 4 or 5, you know, spend a day with the family.
That's exactly, that's what that potentially could be. As you said, we normally discount that. You do have that resident component of that. But again, you know, when I looked at that guest parking, if there's, you know, 4, 5, 6 hours, well, are you going to move your car if you're parking in a 2-hour spot? Are you going to move your car 3 times during that visit? I mean, that kind of defeats the purpose of those spaces, or that use. You know, why would you go to a longer term spot where if I'm going to be here for that period of time, I'm going to park where I'm allowed to?
What are your thoughts on handicap parking on the street, 1 or 2 per block, to help handicap parking on the street?
That is something a lot of communities are looking at.
In a positive way or a negative way?
Oh, no, positively,
okay.
To have those spaces, and you try to make that. There is some talk. It is not, the ADA has been talking about mandating that. that there would have to be handicap spaces on the street. It has not been adopted yet. They've been talking about it for a number of years now, and the standards would be required if you made significant changes to the roadway. There's design standards as to how wide that stall has to be. But one of the recommendations is, for a lot of communities, is that you provide those handicap spaces, and you try to put those perhaps at the end of the blocks where you've got the curb cuts for folks being able to do that. And a lot of communities are looking into that.
That's good to hear, because it's something I recommended before, but I just think with our aging community and to get some of these, residents to come downtown, because I live downtown, I hear people murmur on the street as I'm walking. I live right by the, the parking garage. My building is connected to the Vale Street garage, and you hear the people murmur about, parking situation, or had to drop, grandma off in front of the restaurant a block and a half away, and then go drive up to the 5th floor, and then walk back down, and then go over to the restaurant. And I know there's no perfect solution for all this, so I do appreciate some of the, some of the items that you have, at least, suggested for solutions. What do you do with people who don't want to walk a block and a half? Now, we want to say that we're urban. These are just theoretical, philosophical questions. This downtown in the near future will be more urban than it is suburban. And the old suburban mindset is I could park right in front of Swoboda's, right, Charles? Or, your local, shop and walk in and get my shopping done. That is no longer the case in our downtown. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about changing people's habits or changing people's perceptions, that's not an easy thing to do.
No, you're entirely right.
You could put up all the most beautiful signage in the world. You can educate, but you still might only move that needle of perception so far. How do you successfully do that? How do you more successfully do that than what I'm envisioning?
A lot of communities, and so we do work. There are some small towns, and it's that small town feel. I should be able to park directly in front of my destination. I mean, I've how far are you willing to walk? 50 feet. Seriously? I mean, that just not going to work in most communities. You're going to have to walk a lot farther than that. You're not going to be able to necessarily park right in front of their business. You are going to have to walk some distance. And you're right. That perception is something that is going to have to be changed. And it's why when you're looking at parking, yeah, that doesn't work for me. I want to be able to park right here. Well, I'm sorry. For the system to work, there has to be rules, and the rules have to be followed. Otherwise, you have chaos. If it's like, well, you have rules, but those don't apply to me, that's why you have cars going down the expressway at 95 miles an hour, because the 70 speed limit doesn't apply to them. Those are the cars that create problems. Unfortunately, you have a parking resource. You can't just build, 2,000 car parking garages so that everyone can find parking within 50 feet. This is what the system is going to entail in order for the system to work for Arlington Heights. You're going to have to walk a little bit.
And the reason I ask you that is my personal experience with my parents. They'd go to the Dutton house at 2 o'clock, so they could get a, spot in the afternoon and eat a late lunch. And I know that Jackie's here, I think from Forbici Salon, and I walk out of my building and I see a lot of seniors being helped out. I've helped them myself, getting out of a big 4-door sedan with their walkers so that they can go into salons. So that's why I was wondering about the trends in on-street handicap parking. And then just as a final, just real-life situation, 2 more questions, I'm sorry, Mayor. So in the Vale Street garage, you've got 3 buildings that share that garage. You've got Metropolis Place, where I live, which is 1 South Highland. And you've got Metro Lofts, which is across the street. And you've also got Dutton Towers. So very rarely do I even venture onto the south side of the Vale Street parking garage. I strictly stay to the north side, right? Because that's where my connection is with my building. The people who live in Metro Lofts, they stay on the east side of the garage. They want to find something, whether it's north or south, but they want to be on the east side of the north or south side of that garage, because so they can go down the stairs or the elevator, especially if they have groceries, and go to their building. And Dunton has X number of spaces, and they park in their spots, and then whatever. So it's just something. I don't know if you noticed that. I don't know. I didn't see that in here, but it's just a habit of these people, and it makes sense, right? You want to park as close to your entrance to your building as possible. So I think that's why, you know, people go around only one half of the garage, they see no spaces. You know, they don't want to venture off to the other half because their elevator is all the way over there, or the stairs that they want to use is, you know, on the other side of the garage. Again, we all want to walk the minimum amount of steps. Even with Fitbits on, you know, nobody wants to get their steps in. And then finally, one of the things that confused me in your report was the unbundling of private parking spaces. So you live in a it was unbundling of private parking spaces.
Of resident parking spaces.
Are you talking about surface lots? Are you talking about underground parking?
No, what we're looking at is a developer. What we're seeing in a lot of communities is a developer wants to come into town,
Yeah.
and they're going to put up a residential tower.
Yeah.
And they will package the parking with that apartment. With this apartment, you get 2 parking spaces or 1 parking spaces. What we're suggesting is the village encourages these for the price of your unit, you get your unit. If you want parking, it costs this. And it puts the price of that parking, and it makes the market determine, well, if I'm paying for, if with my apartment, I'm getting 2 spaces, okay, I'm gonna want 2 cars. I'm gonna want, you know, to use those spaces. If I'm paying for them separately, maybe I don't need 2 spaces. Maybe I only need 1. Maybe I make other arrangements. And it is trying to.
So how does that help visitors come to downtown Arlington Heights and find a parking space? This is the part where I don't have the
It's whether
connection.
that parking is, right now, a lot of your residents, parking does not come with a building. They have to use village facilities.
Correct.
So we're just trying to see other opportunities to the amount of additional parking that might have to be created.
Okay, I still don't get it, but that's okay. And Bill, if you could put up your last minute during the meeting cost analysis here for us. I'll be nicer, I might not be nicer than Trustee Scaletta where he said that you threw at us, but why are we getting this tonight? Why wasn't it in our packet?
You know, a lot of it wasn't done. I mean, the list was this. That's the short answer. You know, we were trying to get the report out to you guys as soon as we possibly could. We were analyzing this stuff, and these are rough numbers. You know, any implementation plan is going to have to do a deeper dive on these and come up with funding. And so since we knew we weren't asking for formal approval tonight, this wasn't part of the study per se. This was more something we're saying, how do we, when we frame up this discussion for the board, you know, what are some of the things that we're asking for some guidance on, and that's how it came
And
out.
actually, the 2 biggest numbers are in your report, in the recommendations, the 2.1 and 3.1. The Vale Garage is in your recommendation section on page 10, so it gives the cost to the right of that. But I did the math and put it on this chart, just because there's multiple cameras times 400 to 500 per camera. So those are indicated under costs to the right in the consultant report. I just elaborated a little further on some of these other things that we've just been getting quotes recently on.
Okay, I would have appreciated, as my one trustee here, that we would have had at least this in our packet so that when you threw this up here, Bill, you know, the first thing we all do is look down at the bottom number at 420,000 plus, and I'm sure that's what the residents do as well. And it was just a little bit of a surprise to see that and not have it be in our packet.
So if I could just add, you know, as the report was getting finalized, we were developing the signage concept. So there was $25,000 in this year's budget for a sign that staff had identified that we needed to do on the exterior of the Vale Garage, but we didn't want to move forward with that until we got the results of the study. So as the study was coming in, we started refining those concepts. We sent them out to 2 different sign companies, and it wasn't until maybe Wednesday or Thursday last week that we got the second cost estimate. So we thought this would be helpful to get it done, to show you now rather than show you later. So we were trying to work as quickly as possible, getting some of these numbers put together in a consistent fashion so you can at least see the first phase element and what some of those costs may be. And some of them we haven't got to. That's why it's got a TBD on there.
Okay. Fair enough. And then my last recommendation is to the mayor. and I know you're going to say no, Mayor, but maybe you'll say yes. I would like to see a trustee, a member of this village board, put on the parking committee of staff as some type of oversight and some type of, another voice. We've all said that we look at this, we're all looking at it too closely, and maybe if one of our board members was sitting in with staff, perhaps we could, come up with some of these solutions or other ideas or out-of-the-box thinking ahead of time.
Well, Mike, I'm always open to out-of-box thinking. Why would you think I would say no to that?
Because I've asked before and you haven't accepted, so just.
I don't remember ever being asked that question.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Hold on one second. Just to clarify, Mr. Recklouse, we're not being asked to authorize the expenditure of any funds tonight.
Absolutely not. We're just looking for if the board is generally, interested in pursuing the phase 1 options, then we'll develop an implementation plan, including a revised budget. And some of these things could be a la carte. We'll have just a revised plan of timing, so on and so forth, that would be coming back to the board for discussion. That's all we're looking for at this point. If the board is absolutely not interested in some of these concepts, then we won't waste our time and we won't include them in any implementation plan.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the board for any additional comments, and I'm going to see if the audience has anything to add. So, Trustee Tinaglia.
2 real brief things, Mayor. One is a question for staff. Is there a difference in price that we charge for commuters that might park in one of the garages, any of the garages, versus on a surface lot out there by the library, let's say? Near the library, there's some surface lots, or along the train station.
The commuter pricing in all of our garages is the same.
And the
So
outside lots?
The lots are, surface lots are $2 daily fee.
And what about in a garage?
They're, I want to say $40 for a permit.
Per month.
Per month. Mm-hmm.
So $2
And then it's
a day.
$50 for non-resident.
All right, so
per month.
help me with the math here. So on a month, if I'm going to get a monthly pass, I don't park out there at the train station? I'd have to come in the garage? Is that what
No, you have a choice to use daily fee, which is closest to the train station, or you can park in the garage, park covered for $40, or you can park daily fee on the top floor of any of the garages.
Okay. I guess the reason I'm asking that is I would always lean toward the business owner and the shopper as far as availability of parking stalls are concerned and ease of getting to these stalls. And I would I would carefully try to negotiate with these commuters that we reassign them to, as I think Trustee Scaletta pointed out smartly, that some of them may be unhappy if we were to move them to a top floor or something like that. But I think we have to do it. I would be a trustee that would be in favor of doing that.
If I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that if any of the different stakeholder groups is to be inconvenienced, your perspective is the commuters, you're more willing to inconvenience them than residents, shoppers, business owners, employees.
The people that spend the dollars downtown are the ones I want to take care of. The people that are paying the taxes for those stores that need to be opened, the people that are paying the employees, and the people that are coming and spending the money. I want them to have the best, most accessible parking. And the commuters that are using some of those spaces that if we move them to a top floor where it might get snow or rain, I feel it's no different than those that are parking on the surface lots out there by the train station or whatever. So maybe we adjust the pricing to be fair. I don't want to be unfair to those commuters, but I want to be really, really vigilant for our folks downtown. So that's the first thought. And then the second thing I just want to bring up was this bundling idea. So I'll put my developer hat on for a second, of which I am not, but I am an architect, and I do work for developers. The bundling thing is actually brilliant, and he's 100% right, and I'm going to tell you why. If I sell a condo or an apartment as was described here and you automatically get 2 parking stalls, I'm going to use them, or I'm going to rent them. I'm going to rent the second one to somebody else for $50 a month or whatever it is that they pay. But renting an apartment or buying a condo that you then pay the additional fee to cover that developer's cost that built that, which, by the way, is anywhere from $22,000 to $35,000 a stall, makes a lot of sense, because then it might deter, I may not want to buy that extra stall. I want 1 car instead of 2, so I'm going to save the price on the cost of my rent or my purchase price, and that might just free up a few stalls for guests or shoppers or what have you, because our code isn't going to change. If the ordinance says we have to have so many stalls per the units, those stalls will be built. But there might be more available for other people rather than just a guy parking his extra car because he paid for that stall. So unbundling those makes a lot of sense for us up here. Does that make sense, Mike?
How does it affect the resale value of the condo? It's like, you know, don't you want 2 bathrooms versus 1, and don't you want 2 parking spaces versus 1? And
But you're not paying for it when you bought it.
I know, but I'm talking about the marketability of the resale value of that condo. Maybe somebody says, you know what, I really need 2 parking spaces. You only have 1. I'm not going to buy your unit.
Well, the point there is when you buy it, you know, the code says what you are supposed to provide, but you may choose to buy both of them, or you may choose to only buy 1. The number of stalls that gets built should remain per the ordinance and so on, but I'm just suggesting that, as you are, that having more available for others makes a lot of sense. Parking an extra car doesn't. So those were my 2 points.
Trustee Scaletta.
So if I bought a unit and had 2 stalls, but I had 1 car, I wouldn't go buy another car.
No, but you might rent it to somebody else
Who has a need for it. Okay. So the commuters are the ones who fund through their monthly fee and even daily fee are funding partially funding the maintenance of the garages and some of the improvements. And so I'll stand by my earlier statement. And if I was a merchant in the downtown, I would prefer to walk a little bit further to make sure that there was a space open to my customer. With regard to the motion, I've kind of explained what I'm supportive of, and the motion talks about an implementation plan and commence the phase 1 improvements, which means start the improvements. So I think that staff needs to, we still have to hear from the audience, and we haven't done that yet. And I think that instead of us commencing with phase 1 improvements, it'd probably be best that staff go back after hearing everything that we've had to say tonight and really come up with what the phase 1 improvements would be. I mean, even the pay box doesn't, I mean, where does that number come from? What does that include? I mean, I don't know why we're running when we can't even walk yet. I think that we're just going way too fast. I understand that we wanted this a couple weeks ago and we want to move this forward. Also, we have budgets coming up. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to this. I get it. But what I don't want to do is go into this too fast and make mistakes. There's a lot of information in here to digest. I mean, I don't even know how we go through all of it. I mean, we all just kind of gave our opinions on a variety of different things, but you didn't hear from every single one of us. I mean, I agree, yes, we should individually label each of the floors and they should be different colors, but I didn't say that. But yeah, I don't know how. I mean, it's almost like we need a survey of us to figure out where we agree with the recommendations.
If I can jump
Sure.
in, what I would suggest, and that's fine in terms of eliminating that last clause in terms of commence phase 1 improvements. What I would suggest is that, you know, from the staff perspective, the only things that we're recommending that we consider even immediately are the phase 1 things. Some of the other recommendations, you know, Trustee Sidor had some trepidation about going from 4-hour to 3-hour parking. We did too as well, and that's why it's not on the phase 1 list. We think, you know, maybe someday in the future we'll consider that, but that we didn't put that on the list for the same reason. What we would suggest is that we come up with a more detailed plan on those items, the ones that we've identified, because we think, again, from our perspective, those are the ones that are more possible in the relative short term. And then there'd be another discussion at another committee, the whole meeting, where we talk about it. And then at that point, if the board wants to consider any of the other items, or if you want to take some of these off the list based on what we're finding in terms of cost and implementation time, then we could do that before we commit to actually moving forward with anything.
I agree, because even with when we talk about the merchant and the commuter permits, you know, instead of me, I will say, as much as there's so much information in here, it's really not easy for me to grab information from it. How many commuter permits are sold in the Vale garage? How many merchants are sold in the garage? How many spaces are on level 4? How many spaces are on level 5? I mean, I think that we need to have a longer dialogue. You know, I mean, this document is 134 pages long. So there's a lot of information here, and so far we've spent a total of 2 hours, which isn't even that much when we're talking about such an important topic, you know, that has to do with the long-term viability of the downtown. So I want to move forward on this. I think that we still need to have further conversations, and I don't want to commit to any phase 1 improvements yet that are going to cost money until we have further dialogue. I mean, yes, I agree that we should have blade signs, and yes, we should have the guidance system. But beyond that, I think that we need to talk some more, and staff needs to regroup and talk about all the things that we discussed up here, and I'm eager to hear from the audience.
If I could add one more thing too, the only thing on here that's being actively worked on, and it's been a project for a while, is having the dial by phone pay option at our daily fee lots. And that's something, I don't know if Ms. McCullough wants to.
Sure, I can. We've been pursuing this for quite some time, and when we got into the details of it and what the costs would be, we realized that if we went ahead and implemented with the way the vendor is suggesting, the village may have to be in a position where it may subsidize the $2 fee that we're currently charging. So what happens is the vendor that we're working with right now charges 37 cents. So automatically, you know, it's a $2 daily fee, so it's $2.37 to park. With that, there actually is credit card fees and so forth. So for the village to break even, that's what we're negotiating with right now, because there's credit card fees and there's merchant fees and so forth. So we have to determine if we're okay with charging $2.41 to break even, $2.50. What is that? So that's where we kind of pulled in the finance department. We're working with the vendor, going to be looking at a few other vendors, and wanted to see what else would be come up from the results of tonight's discussion. Because if we did not charge more than $2, the village is actually going to, you know, we'll take a hit and we'll be getting $1.63 on the $2 that we just increased this past October.
But the reason I bring it up is that's one that you may have, independent of these items, may be coming sooner rather than later, because we're getting close on that one. But that one would not require any investment of, village infrastructure other than staff time to help administer it.
I do think that, as Manager Recklaus is describing as well, is that we have to come up with a policy decision as to what works, what we will accept. So we just passed an ordinance with these new fee structures. So at least we knew that $2 worked for us in this new fee structure. However, if the vendor automatically charges 37 cents, are people going to park for $2.50, $2.40? How much of our cost do we need to recoup and so forth? So there's a few more discussion points that are needed.
Sounds like another significant increase.
Okay, well, I also had some concerns about the language of the suggested motion, particularly the words "and commence." And so I think a suggested change would be to develop an implementation plan to consider phase 1 or initial improvements or something to that effect. So just something to throw out there. Trustee LaBedz?
Thank you. Couple things. I do want to go back to the commuters. There is a significant amount of commuter parking that is out in the open and on S and A and the top floors. So, I'm not, commuters are residents too. Commuters also spend money in the downtown, and as Trustee Scaletta pointed out, they help to fund the care of the garage and so forth. So I'm not so sure that I would want to see them put at the bottom of the list as far as, you know, where they can park and so on. I also know that by the fact that they commute, they see the new places open up, and then they turn around and they come to the restaurants. I hear it just with the people I stand at the train station with. Oh yeah, we're gonna go to Shaku. Oh yeah, we're gonna, look into Hey Nani, whatever. Oh, I see this new bakery opened up. So I do want to speak here on behalf of the commuters, and they not only help fund the care and feeding of the garage themselves, but also pay the taxes, pay the merchants, and so forth. Another thing, and I didn't mention it earlier, was I'm still also concerned about downtown employee parking close to they're taking up spaces on the street where it would be right close to the restaurant or the business. I had a conversation with an employee of a restaurant last winter who said it was too cold to go park in a block and a half away in the garage. So this employee parked right along the street right by the restaurant where the employee worked. When I had walked several blocks to come to this place and didn't drive at all. So it was like, I'm not terribly sympathetic, but so I think that's something we have to continue to work on. So thank you.
Okay. Trustee Sidor.
Thank you, Mayor. For the record, Hey Nani does have a little spot at the bottom of their website that tells you where to park. They tell you to park in the Vale Street garage.
Fantastic.
So that was a good one. But it was a good point, John, because, I thought I remember seeing something like that on their website, and thanks to Rich for looking it up for me. David, I've got one last question for you. So I'd like to be optimistic, but when John says he tried to, get some kind of an agreement with Citibank and they didn't want to go there due to liability, how much of this plan of using private parking, like at banks and what have you, when they're not open, how much of your plan to make what we currently have available work rests upon successfully negotiating agreements with, the banks, like Citibank, Chase, what have you?
Well, if you look at the private parking, Chase Bank and Citibank both have about 50 spaces. So they're just those two would be 100. What you have, the other large vacant parcel or parcel that you potentially could use would be Evergreen Center or Dutton Court. Mm-hmm. One's got maybe 40 spaces, one's got maybe 20 spaces. So that's capacity. I think the biggest part is, and again, it's, trying to market the Village Hall garage. You got 200 spaces over here. Yes, it is not right next door. Yes, it is a little bit farther. But if we could try to entice people to do that, and when you're looking at it, when parking does get tight, it's, well, where is it? If it's 6 blocks away, it's not going to be, but Village Hall is really not that far, so that's a good portion of that. And then you have the spaces just on the other side of the tracks. Lot A is 46 spaces, so there's 250 spaces right there. And, yes, not all private businesses will necessarily agree to you, but the other thing that we suggest is, even if they don't want to, if a private business does not want to open that up as quote-unquote public parking, are there opportunities either through the village or through private businesses to negotiate with them and say, hey, okay, we're not going to make that public parking, but can I have 10 spaces there and tell my staff to go and park in that, as I mentioned that other restaurant in that other project. I have now just freed up 10 spaces that employee may have been parking on the street or in one of the garages in spaces that are not being used.
Okay,
so that is another opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the board on this agenda item? Okay, seeing none. We'll come back to the board then for any further discussion and hopefully a motion. Does the staff have enough direction in terms of what you were looking for tonight?
Depending on what the motion is, I believe so.
Okay. Trustee Scaletta.
I would move that the Committee of the Whole recommend to the Village Board the acceptance of the downtown parking study and authorize staff to develop an implementation plan.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you again for your very detailed study. Let me just ask you this, Randy. How much will the consultant be involved in further discussions?
I think unless we have to have a technical question for them based on their findings, I believe we can be dealing with this in-house. To come up with, look at steps and timelines and costs and so forth.
Okay, so their engagement, it basically ends tonight.
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, with that then, I just want to thank you again for all your hard work. And if there's no other business, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
By Trustee Tinaglia, seconded by Trustee LaBedz. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.